Hello, my name is Taylor. I'm Taylor Cochran. I am a assistant manager at one of our slope stores, and I've done some of these webinars in the past, and so I'm here moderating today. I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that the recording for this webinar will be on our website this coming Tuesday. It'll be up on our website. If you go to the Learn tab where you found all these kinds of information, you'll have the older recordings for all of our other webinars. And so you can find this one this coming Tuesday. There's also an outline that was probably sent out to everyone, as well as I will be dropping it in the chat. So if you want to see the outline, I will periodically drop in the chat so we can kind of see what Dan's going to be talking about. Maybe it'll help you bring up some questions and kind of see what's going on. But yeah, it's 10 o'clock. So let's get going. I also wanted to give the heads up. We have a couple webinars coming up really soon. If you haven't seen it on our website yet, we have a tips for drought tolerant watering webinar. It's going to be actually this coming Wednesday. So it is the 6th of this month. So just as a heads up to everyone, we've been usually doing these on Saturday as you are here today, but we have a Wednesday class coming up and it's going to be at 5 p.m. So it's a later in the night kind of Wednesday class. But tips of drought tolerant watering is very important. It's a really cool one to learn how to really sustainably garden, as well as make sure we are conscious about our watering, because it is the time of the year that is really important, and it's really important no matter what time of the year, especially here in California. So check out that one. It's going to be with Our Water, Our World. They are really knowledgeable about all these kinds of topics, and they're really fun to listen to. So hope to see everyone there. And then the week after, the 9th of next month, we have our first Summer Garden Spotlight series, which we're all really excited about. It's a new thing we're trying, and we're going to have a bunch of different kinds of artists and professionals of different kinds of fields that use plants in their profession or their trade. So this one's going to be a really fun one with a bartender. They're going to be making cocktails. So that one is at 5 p.m. as well next Wednesday, the 9th. So if you are interested in making some cocktails or want to listen to some cool people play with their plants and actually use them in their everyday lives, definitely check that one out. There's even a really cool discount code on bitters that they're going to be using. So if you go to our website, you can find a discount code to buy the bitters if you want to work along with us and actually make some cocktails on that day. But again, Wednesday, 5 p.m., just a heads up because it's a different day than we usually do. And lastly, I just want to welcome everyone here again. I see a bunch of people have joined in now. We're about to get started with Dan Alexander on our Berries 101 class. It's a really cool topic that I am very excited about because I grow a fair bit of berries in my backyard, and I really like having blueberries and strawberries and all these different kinds of stuff available to me while I'm actually gardening. I kind of like pick them, eat them. So being able to grow them properly is a really nice kind of skill to have. So I'm happy to have Dan here to talk about that. We have Jen behind the camera who's can give a little bit of insight when she ever wants to, and I will be here in the chats. So if you have some questions, definitely put it into our Q&A. I'll be going through them, kind of sifting through, finding some cool ones that we can have Dan talk to, and anything that I can answer pretty quickly, I'll give you an answer in the chat or in the Q&A. And then if you want to talk in the chat too, I'll be there. Especially I'll be posting that outline. So without further ado, let's pass it over to Dan and learn about some berries. Thanks, Dan.
I'm on.
Yep.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
Dan Editor. I'm here at the Slope Garden Center on Miller Avenue in Mill Valley, and I'm surrounded by berries here. Very nice place to be at the moment. If you've had a chance to look at the outline, don't be intimidated. It's very long. And we're going to focus on a short list today. Try to keep this to an hour or so. So we're going to focus on what, at least to me, seem to be the most popular berries, which are strawberries and blueberries. And then we're going to talk some about the bramble berries, raspberries and blackberries. But they are a little more complicated in a sense because there are different kinds that need different kinds of staking and pruning, and we could almost devote an entire session to those. So we'll just give an overview of them, and you can get more detail on that either by sending us questions or coming in and chatting with your local garden center. I do want to make a shout out to visiting a local garden center, because that will have the people that know your particular area and microclimates and soil types the best. I know that when someone asks me a question about what will grow at Lake Tahoe, I'm a little out of my element. I'm very familiar with Bay Area gardening, but not so much with gardening outside of the area. And so I like to keep with my area of expertise and send people to other people who have expertise in other spots. So let's start with strawberries, which I think are the most popular berries to grow, and they're also the easiest berries to grow. And they are very satisfying in the garden as a result. Strawberries, modern strawberries that we see before us here that we buy in the store are a hybrid strawberry that was developed in France in the 1700s. They've been around a long time. And they do not contain the wild strawberries, the forest strawberries that you would think of as being maybe French, fraise de bois. They're a cross between a Eastern North American strawberry and the Chilean strawberry. As a result, the Chilean strawberry part of them keeps them low and makes them ideal for our kind of climate, because that strawberry can practically grow wild here. By itself, the Chilean strawberry doesn't have much in the way of edible berries, but once it was crossed and developed, it has all the different berry types that we have today. We can break strawberries down into three groups. The ones that bear most heavily in the late spring, early summer, which we call June-bearing strawberries. Then the ones that we call ever-bearing strawberries, a bit of a misnomer because they really bear most heavily in June, and then they give you a few during the summer and then another crop in the fall. And then the ones we call daylight neutral, which don't care about the day length and will give you kind of an even crop all through the summer. And we've listed a few varieties in the outline in each section, but it's good to grow in your garden a little bit of each, especially if you have any desire to freeze, can, make jam, that sort of thing. The June-bearing strawberries are fabulous for that because they'll give you a very heavy crop all at once where you'll have enough quantity to do those sorts of things. If you're really more interested in just picking a few at a time through the entire season, then the daylight neutral ones will give you a steady flow of strawberries, but not as many. My rule of thumb is that you need at least half a dozen plants per person that you're going to feed in order to have the ability to pick strawberries, if not on a daily basis, at least a few times a week, to have enough to have some fun with. More than that, more than a half a dozen would be even better, but most of us have space limitations. But that would be about the minimum, other than to just have them as a novelty. Strawberries are members of the rose family, and they have the typical elements of a rose flower, the 5 petals, and they share being in the rose family with the bramble bushes, the blackberries and raspberries. And they get fertilized primarily by insects and then grow the berry so that the flower falls off the long end here and the stem end is back here. They share with a lot of other fruits the difficulty at the flower end of sometimes getting disease there, what we call blossom end rot, because that's where the blossom fell off. That brings us to the element of calcium, which is an absolute essential for strawberries, just like if you heard us talk about tomatoes and peppers and squash. Calcium is the essential element to avoid blossom end rot, and that's true in strawberries as well. Strawberries like a fertile soil that drains quickly. In other words, they don't like to sit in water, and especially not in water with a heavy clay soil. So if you have a clay soil, you want to add a lot of organic matter. My preference is compost and a small amount of manure. Ratio would be at least 3 parts compost to 1 part manure. And you can get the same sort of activity by buying a good planting mix and mixing it with your soil, or in a pot, and many of us grow them in pots, a good quality potting soil. They don't require a particularly acid or alkaline soil, just a fairly neutral, good quality potting soil. The sloped organic potting soil is excellent for growing the strawberries. Advantages to growing in pots are 2, I think, principally. One is that it can ensure good drainage, which is essential. And the other is that it gets the berries up in the air so that they primarily flop over the side of the container, and you don't have them down on the ground where things like snails and slugs are more likely to get at them. So it's almost like having them in a mound of soil, except they're in the pot and then hanging over. The strawberries bloom in the spring, and some of these are blooming and some have already set fruit, as you can see here. And then they've not only set the fruit, but they've matured the fruit now. These are ready to pick. They're red all the way to the base. You don't see any white there. And they're a little bit soft, and they're quite fragrant. If I give it a few squeezes here, it's strawberry heaven. Now this one, this is interesting. This one's actually been on just a little too long, and I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little bit of softness right there, which means that it's a little overripe. And we tend not to pick them here at the nursery, as tempting as it is. We let them hang on the plants so that you all, when you come in, are tempted to buy them. So they sometimes stay on a little too long like that. When this show is over, we'll eat the ones that are ready to eat, maybe. Strawberries are generally available to you in 2 ways, 6 packs or giant jumbo packs like this, which have 6 plants, all of the same variety, together. And they generally have 1 crown in there and a pretty well developed root system. A crown is the growing part of the strawberry here. Strawberries don't branch out from the leaves. Every leaf grows out of the crown. And then many of the varieties will send up what we call runners. Here's a runner. So this also comes from the crown, but you can see that along the way, the runner will start to make a new plant. And there are little rootlets that have started here, so that if this is planted, it will grow into the new strawberry plant. And this is one of the ways that strawberries are propagated commercially, is to snip the runners and grow new plants. They're not grown from seed because they've been developed to a point where the seeds wouldn't, even if they were viable, and they're usually not, they wouldn't give you a good strawberry to eat. So the ones that make runners, you propagate from runners. And then the ones that don't make runners, I don't know if there are any here that are old enough to show you, but yes, here's one that's made multiple crowns. So this could be divided. One crown here with its growing center and one crown here with its growing center. This could be divided, and that would be the way that you would propagate this. This is quinault strawberry. I mentioned in the outline that, and many people ask this question, that organic strawberries, that is certified organically grown strawberries, are difficult to find. The reason is that there aren't very many organically grown starts, crowns available, even to the growers we buy from who grow all of our organically grown vegetables. And so, for instance, somebody who we get all the organic lettuce from may grow strawberries, but the crowns aren't certified organic, and so they can't call them certified organic strawberries, even though they're grown the same way they grow everything else without any sprays or pesticides. While strawberries are one of those high level plants that commercially grown, they use a lot of chemicals to grow strawberries. One of the good reasons for growing them in your backyard is that you don't have to grow them using those chemicals. You're not going to sterilize your soil and spray them for every bug that comes near them. There are occasionally organically grown starts available, and they will have the organic label, USDA organic, or the equivalent. There are a number of different symbols that can mean organically grown. So from Sweetwater Nursery here, they will produce both organic and non-certified strawberry plants, and we buy them both from them because you simply can't get enough of the organic starts. This is a strawberry called Deliz, as in delicious, I guess, D-E-L-I-Z-Z. And there are, every year there are new varieties of strawberries that come along. Many of them developed for commercial production, and they tend to get bigger and bigger, the fruit. I'm not sure they get more and more delicious. I think that strawberries that top out at about this size, maybe this size here, tend to be the most flavorful. And if they get too much bigger than that, they are mostly water, and they're not concentrating the flavor in the strawberry. Now, another kind of strawberry that people ask about and want to grow are the wild strawberries, the Fresnois. Now, they are not a hybrid strawberry. They're actually a wild strawberry that grows in Europe. And they have very small berries that are intensely flavored. And growers have found red, yellow, and white varieties of wild strawberries. They're all flavorful. And I think people mainly toss them into salads and that sort of thing for a little flavor bomb in the salad. They're not terrifically productive. And so you sort of save them for that, either do what Taylor does and eat them as you garden to keep you going, or save them for the occasional flavor bomb in something that you're feeding people. And they're not always available. If you, especially this year, if you're interested in them, if you see them somewhere, grab them, because they've been in short supply this year, as have many nursery products, a result of the huge gardening craze that happened during the pandemic. And the growers are just way behind in production. And we have had trouble getting lots of different nursery products consistently during the year. Strawberries, no different. Strawberries usually are available first early in the spring, but often they sell out completely, and it wipes the growers out. And then we wait until more like May for more to come in. And now, for instance, they're more readily available. And you may think, well, if they're June bearing, what's the point of buying them now and putting them in? Because we've sort of missed the June season because they haven't had a chance to grow. Well, that's kind of true. But on the other hand, you will get them well established so that you will have a more substantial crop next year. If you were a commercial grower, you would snip off all the flowers this first year and just let the plants grow so that they could produce large amounts of fruit in the second year. I don't advocate that for home gardening. I think you want to get the fruit when you can get the fruit. And so I say grow it and eat it. But there's no downside to planting plants during the season and letting them get well established for your large crop next spring. Some of the varieties that are most commonly grown around here and very successful include Albion and Sequoia, Eversweet, Quinault. Those are all readily available usually, and all do very well here. We have a good climate for strawberries. We're a little short on the kind of more sandy soil that they really appreciate. And so that's why you need to work in plenty of organic matter to make sure that it drains well. You've seen probably the strawberries growing down around the Salinas Valley area, Capitola along the coast. And there they make hills and grow the strawberries on top of the hills and use black plastic around them, which both warms the soil and keeps the berries off of the soil. But they have also sterilized the soil with some fairly nasty chemicals. And that's something that we can avoid at home. The pests that bother them the most are first snails and slugs, earwigs, and then probably a few birds that will eat them from time to time. I do recommend you use Sluggo or Sluggo Plus. Those are both rated for organic gardening. The Sluggo is an iron-based poison which kills snails and slugs. Sluggo Plus adds a bacteria, spinosad, which will kill chewing insects, and that's where the earwigs come in. So the Sluggo Plus will take care of earwigs. It's otherwise difficult to control snails and slugs, and you can do it by keeping the area around the strawberries very dry, because snails and slugs have difficulty crawling across really dry areas, and especially dry areas that have cement or brick. They absorb so much moisture that the snails dehydrate as they cross it, and so that's a possible approach. We also sometimes have a product, a copper tape, which you can put around the lips of containers at least, or raised beds. And the snails and slugs don't like the electrical activity that happens when they try to cross the copper. And so it deters them from coming into the beds. And otherwise, you have to keep a sharp eye out and pick them and get rid of them as best you can. Watering strawberries is critical. I know this is going to be a challenging year for water for all of us in the Bay Area, but if you're going to grow strawberries, you have to water them, and they do not do well going bone dry. They first of all, the fruit will shrivel up, but the plants won't do well as either. They're not very deep rooted, maybe a foot. And so they'll need regular watering. Again, in a container, you can maximize your water retention by having a good big saucer under your container. Water until that saucer fills up, and then it will slowly be drawn back up by the soil in the pot. And you won't have water draining away and being wasted that way. And in the ground, make sure that the water is aimed at the roots of the plant. It doesn't do any good to sprinkle the top of them. It doesn't do any good to sprinkle lightly the soil. You want to soak each plant so that that water gets down a foot or so. And it should be enough once they're established a couple of months. It should be enough to water them once a week that way. So they won't be real water sinks. Let's see. Rodents can be a problem, and netting can help for both birds and rodents. Either the regular bird netting or row cover. If you have a transient problem that's not going to be there the whole season, you can lay the white blanket of row cover over them, and sunlight and water can still penetrate, but it will keep the animals off of them, at least as long as you've got the row cover on them. But I think netting is a good solution if you have an ongoing rodent problem. So that's pretty much it. Taylor, do we have any strawberry-centric questions?
Yeah, we actually have a few. Really great talk. I actually learned a lot about I really like learning about the runners and stuff like that. We actually had a question about, is there like a size that you should look at for the runners? Like, is there are they a certain kind of size, or do you need to have roots or like a certain amount of leaves before you can actually propagate them?
Well, actually, this runner is a great example. And as long as we kept it a little bit humidified here up in the leaves so they didn't just dry out, this already has rootlets started, and I could snip this right off like that and plant it, and it would grow. And what I might want to do is put, say, a plastic bag over it with a couple of holes in it to keep it humidified for a week or so. But the roots will grow very quickly, and you'll have a new plant going in no time. So that's really a perfect size when you can see the little rootlets. And I don't know if they're visible on the camera, but there are little nubs there that will become the roots.
Yeah.
If you were planting that into, or if a guest asked you what kind of soil you'd recommend, do you have a first one you would go to?
I would plant it in the good potting soil. I'm very happy with the Sloat organic potting soil. I've used the Fox Farm Ocean Forest potting soil, the Recipe 420 potting soil. They're all excellent, quite fertile, which is good for the strawberries. They hold about the right amount of moisture for strawberries. So any of those is excellent. The regular, what we call the regular sloat potting soil, would be quite functional. It drains well. It's not as fertile. It doesn't have as much fertility as these sort of premium potting soils have, but you can make up for that with a simple application of something like the tomato vegetable food, and maybe a little bit of extra calcium from my friend the oyster shell. Great source of calcium for every plant that I would say in general for your vegetables, calcium be added every time.
And actually, when you're growing, go Jen.
Oh, I was just wondering, how deep would you plant that?
That's a very good question. The growing crown here, where this leaf is coming out, has to be above ground. So it's really just going to be sitting with the little rootlets under the ground, and the soil level will be right about here.
Oh, so you
don't
like
want to
support
bury the crown.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And you don't want to let it dry out too much, right? That's why the humidity is really helpful while they're first growing the roots. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you're planting other vegetables, especially like you were talking about the oyster shells, on your outline, you mentioned maybe not planting it near peppers or tomatoes or something like that. Is there a reason why you would avoid that?
There is, even though they're not in the same family at all, there are diseases of strawberries that can go to your potato family plants like tomatoes and peppers, and vice versa. And so it's really best to keep them separated if you can. I mean, in small, especially in small urban gardens, obviously we can't plant one in the back 40 and one in the front 40. You know, that doesn't work. But to the extent you have the ability to keep them separate, do that. It does not mean disaster if you can't do it. It's just we'll call it a best practice, but not a necessary practice. That's a good distinction to make.
Yeah. I think that's, there's a couple more questions, and actually there's some people answering questions in the chat, and thank you everyone for participating, and keep them coming, but let's move on to the next topic. We'll check back again.
Very good. Oh, and while we're on calcium, I just want to let you know that eggshells, although they're full of calcium, are not available to plants for years, unless you are to powder them the way the oyster shell has been powdered for you already. The calcium that's in the eggshell won't be available for your plants, and so that should not be your sole source of calcium. Never hurts to put them in the ground, but they're just going to be there as eggshells for a long time. Okay, next topic is blueberries. Who can't love a blueberry? Look at this little plant right here, and look at these nice, fat, juicy blueberries that are just, oh, this one fell off. Sorry. Oh, that's delicious. Wow. All right, so this is an O'Neill blueberry. O'Neill is one of the long time and long season southern high bush blueberries. Blueberries are a worldwide phenomenon, but most of the species grow in North America. And those of you from the East probably already know wild blueberries. We don't have them here in the West. But the wild blueberry is a low-growing bush that can take up hundreds of acres at a time in what they call blueberry deserts. And there's virtually nothing but blueberries that grow there. They grow in a very acid soil with wet conditions, and they make a small and intensely flavored blueberry that we cannot grow in our gardens successfully here. They need too much cold, too much acidity, and too much moisture during the summer to be successful here. But fortunately, there are other kinds of blueberries, and the high bush blueberry is another North American species, which is the kind that we see in grocery stores. The northern high bush blueberry is grown in colder climates, especially Oregon and Washington are the two biggest blueberry producing states in the United States. And the United States is the largest blueberry producer in the world. The northern high bush requires cold winters for the bushes to be able to set fruit well. And we don't have enough cold here in the Bay Area, anywhere in the Bay Area, for them to be really successful. They'll grow, you will get fruit, it's excellent fruit, but you won't get very much fruit. But again, fortunately, the horticulturalists have found other species of blueberries which they can mix in, and they created the southern highbush blueberry. And the southern highbush does just dandy in our climate. They have the advantage of being virtually evergreen. A northern highbush will want to go dormant during the winter and lose all its leaves. A southern highbush will go semi-dormant depending on how cold the winter is. But some of them are very good looking little bushes that will keep all their foliage year round and look very nice in your garden. You can see this little guy here. This is a sunshine blue, which is one of the prettiest of all the bushes. You can see how pretty the new growth is, almost pink, and it comes out into this really great blue-green color, and it grows fairly compactly and happens to have delicious berries as well. In previous years, these have been available in large quantities and in large sizes, up to 15-gallon plants, which are good sized bushes. But this year, this is about the biggest we've seen in this particular variety. And so this is basically a 1-year-old cutting, and it will probably, well, it hasn't made any blooms this year and isn't going to, but next year it'll start to bloom and produce fruit. Blueberries are in one of my favorite families, the Acaceae, which are home of the Ericas, the Heaths and Heathers, our native manzanitas and madrones, wonderful garden plants like purus. And what they tend to have in common is little bell-shaped flowers. And I'm afraid we're just a little bit too late here. All the flowers have turned into fruit. Oh, I take it back. We do have a few flowers on, I think, on this little compact guy here. Well, no, I take it back. They've all started to make fruit.
Maybe down here.
Is there one there? Well, no,
That's
that's a
kind of-
fruit. Yeah, that's already fallen off and it's made the fruit. Anyway, the flowers are these little bells, and they're very pretty. They are pollinated by bees, and many of the species that have those little bell-shaped flowers are pollinated best by bumblebees, which grab onto the flower, detach their rear wings, and flap their front wings to the tune of middle C on the piano, and vibrate the flower so that it gets pollinated. Then they put their wings back together, fly off to the next bunch of flowers and pollinate them. They do a much better job than honeybees do at pollinating bumblebees. And in commercial orchards, they've learned to leave patches of the natural weedy foliage between the rows of blueberries to give a home for the bumblebees, which will do the job of pollinating. So they can be part of the solution for keeping the bees around if the farmers do it right. If they just do a huge square area of blueberries, they've found that the bumblebees don't go anywhere except around the edges. And so that's not a very good way to do it. Now, blueberries, southern, first of all, you want to look for southern highbush blueberries. And then there are many, many varieties, all of which are pretty darn good. And some of them are early season, some are mid-season, some are later in the season, so that if you mix those properly, you'll have a long picking season for your blueberries. And you'll have the advantage of some cross-pollination, which can increase your yields a little bit. They are self-fertile, but they produce a little better with with some cross-pollination from other varieties of berries. I usually tell people, well, that's real important if you're a commercial grower and you have to have that 10% more, that's your profit margin. At home, we're not counting, and that 10% is not critical. So if you just have one variety, you'll be fine. But if you have the choice, get 2 varieties. And you can tell just by looking at the plants kind of what their manner of growth is going to be. Some are more upright, some are very compact. Let me pull a few out here. You can see this, is this the emerald? Emerald is going to be a big bush when it grows up. And you can see that it wants to grow up and out, and it's going to keep sending up new branches to do that. And most of the blueberries will end up, if they're really happy, at about 4 feet tall. Some of them are much more compact than that. And this guy, who is not the most attractive in the world at the moment, is one of the super dwarf blueberry varieties. And what do we call him? Blueberry Glaze. I have tasted them. They're very good. They're almost black. They almost look like a currant, but they're quite tasty. A little on the tart side, but very, very flavorful. And that will grow just dandy in a pot this size for a long time. And it'll end up looking like a little bonsai tree, maybe 18 inches tall, and just be terrific for a small container. The other plants will take advantage of a larger container if you have the space for it. These are what we call 2-gallon size nursery containers. And if I were to want to grow this in a container, I'd put it directly into a 5-gallon size container, which is, yeah, that one. This is a 5-gallon size cloth pot, which is really handy because it has handles on it. And I put a little soil there, but you can see how that would fit nicely and give about, 1 inch to 2 inches all the way around it, and maybe 3 to 4 inches on the bottom to grow into, and would be excellent for growing up for a season, after which you can move it up into something even bigger. What I like to do is pot them up in stages so that they can fill the pot with their roots, get well established in that pot, and then move them up to the next size. That way, there isn't a lot of soil that isn't being used, and that can develop air pockets. It can develop bacterial and fungus problems. I like the soil to be in use as much as possible. Blueberries have, and this is true for most of their cousins, other types, azaleas and rhododendrons, they have a very light, kind of fibrous root system, and it lacks what we call root hairs. Root hairs are tiny little extensions on the roots that absorb the moisture and the nutrients. Blueberries don't have those. So with this light little root system, I don't fill around too much with the roots when I plant them. I would want to just scratch them up a little bit so that the old soil can make better contact with the new soil. But if you have seen me plant tomatoes or peppers, you'll know that I'm a little rougher with those. But I just want to lightly fuzz up the outside on the blueberries. Blueberries rely more than most plants on what we call mycorrhizal fungi to make the connection between the roots and the nutrients in the soil. The mycorrhizal fungi live in harmony with the plant roots. The plant gives them sugars that it makes through its leaves, and the fungi give them the nutrients back. Blueberries are one of the heaviest users of mycorrhizal fungi. Now, it happens that I have right here mycorrhizal fungi in a can. And this is a pretty wonderful product, I think, which I would sprinkle directly on the roots. Let's pretend these are the roots. Then I would just sprinkle it on the roots like salt and pat it in a little bit. And it has some fertilizer in it as well, but it gets the mycorrhizal fungi right there onto the roots. And it also comes in a small envelope if you want to try just a little bit. This is the big can. It's fairly expensive, about $30. But you don't use a lot. And at least in my own experience, which admittedly is not scientific research, I'm convinced that it's helpful. You'll also notice that in many of the fertilizers, better quality fertilizers like the EV stone fertilizers, if you read the ingredient list, it will include bacteria and fungi, what they call mycorrhizae, on the box, because they have gone to the trouble of adding some of the beneficial bacteria and fungi right to the fertilizer. And that's a good practice. Now, strawberries, I keep saying strawberries, I mean blueberries, have particular soil needs, and that is they need an acid soil. And it isn't that they just like an acid soil, they really need it. Here in the Bay Area, we do not have naturally very acid soil. Some of our soils are slightly acidic. Most are just about neutral. But we're talking, if neutrality is a pH of 7, we're talking a desired pH of about 4.5 to 5.5 with blueberries. And that's fairly acidic. That's about the same that you would want for azaleas, rhododendrons, and heaths and some of the heaths and heathers. Now, to get that kind of acidity, your best bet is to use, first of all, an acidic potting soil or planting mix. Whether you're going to plant in a pot or mix this with your soil, this is a peat moss based potting soil, and it also has some added soil sulfur in it, which creates the acidity. Together with that, you want to use an acidic fertilizer, which, since acidity is something that comes and goes, you have to keep adding elements to your soil that will keep it acidic. Now, there are ways to make it really acidic using soil sulfur directly, and soil sulfur is very available, but it's a little dangerous in the sense that you can overdo it. And you can burn the roots if you use too much soil sulfur. So my own feeling is, unless you're willing to become a little bit of a chemist and test your soil regularly so that you can calculate how much soil sulfur to put in, I would go with the prepared acid fertilizer. And after you've planted, after you've added this to the soil, also mulch around your plants with the acid planting mix, and that will help keep leaching the acid properties into the soil to keep the conditions right for the blueberries. Blueberries also require pretty even, constant moisture. They're not quite like cranberries, they're cousins. Which actually grow in bogs, but blueberries grow where it's quite moist. and they are not a Mediterranean climate natural plant. And the Mediterranean climate is what we have here. It's a wonderful climate for growing many, many things, but it's a little tough on blueberries during the summer when they get no rainwater. So you have to irrigate blueberries through the summer. They do not do well getting bone dry. And usually the kinds of mixes that you're growing in become difficult to re-wet if they become bone dry. If you've ever experienced peat moss out of a bag that is dry as a bone, you'll know that it takes a lot to get it wet. You have to knead it and squish it around, and slowly it absorbs the moisture. If it gets bone dry in a pot and you just pour water through the top, it'll just run right through and not get the soil mixture wet. So again, if you're using pots, make sure you have a saucer under it so that water can go through and be drawn back up and evenly wet. And if you're in the ground, make sure that you soak the area well. Again, none of the light sprinkling on top of the soil. That does no good at all. You want to soak a little bit so that the entire area around the root ball gets good and wet. Once again, if you mulch, that will help retain moisture. You can put up to a couple of inches of mulch around the plants. But again, this is the crown of the blueberry plant, and you don't want to cover that with mulch. You want to start the mulch about 2 inches outside the crown and go out. This guy's kind of leaning over, but you want to go out just past what we call the drip line, where the edge of the foliage is. And then as the plant gets bigger, you'll keep moving the mulch out farther and farther. But mulch is very, very helpful for both keeping the acidity and for keeping the moisture in. Blueberries, unlike most of the plants we talk about, the edibles, they are not heavy feeders. That means they don't need a lot of nitrogen. And some of the forms of nitrogen that are available in some of the instant fertilizers aren't very good for them. You want to avoid the nitrate form nitrogen. So if you have a bottle of liquid fertilizer, take a look at the kind of nitrogen that's in it. If it has nitrate nitrogen, don't use it on your blueberries. It will be fine for everything else, but not for the blueberries. And a slow releasing organic fertilizer is your best bet for them. This one is exactly that. All the ingredients are from organic sources, and it has 5% nitrogen, 5% phosphorus, 3% potash or potassium, and that's a nice balance. And it will slowly decompose in your soil and slowly feed the plant, and it will take it up and be happy with it. You don't want to shock a blueberries really tiny roots with a really concentrated fertilizer. Not going to be effective, and you'll end up probably with the roots being burned, and then the next symptom will be the leaves will start to turn brown around the edges because the roots aren't absorbing the moisture properly. Blueberries around here don't have a lot of disease and pest problems, fortunately. Like all plants, there are diseases that can attack them, but they're mainly problems where you have large monoculture orchards of them. And in the home garden, you're not going to get probably some of the cankers and fungus problems that they have in the orchards. We're usually more concerned with the beasties that eat the fruit because they're competitors with us, unless we're growing them to feed them. And the biggest competitors are rodents and birds. And here, unlike the strawberries, the birds love blueberries. And they seem to be able to enjoy them just before they're ripe enough for us to enjoy them. So they're still a little too tart. We don't want to pick them, and bang, they get them, and we never get to eat the ripe ones. Well, netting is really your only solution. And I meant to get a package of bird netting, but it comes in a little folded up package. The netting, holes in the netting are about that big. What is that? Maybe a ½ inch by a ½ inch. And it can be helpful just to lay the netting on top. But they'll be able, some of the birds are brave enough to just land on it and peck through. If you make a little frame to put over the plants, that'll be more effective. But again, you have to, pretty much get it down to the ground, because some of those little ground dwellers will scurry under there and get at the plants even with the netting over them. The netting can keep the larger rodents out. It's probably not going to keep voles or mice out, but it'll keep the rats out. But the voles and mice, in my experience, aren't a big problem. Rats can be a problem, and birds definitely. We don't have many chewing insects that eat the leaves of blueberries. And if we get a few leaves eaten, we really don't care. And even if we get a few little caterpillars during the course of the year, I always like to say that if you didn't have any caterpillars on your plants, you wouldn't have any baby birds in their nests, because baby birds eat almost exclusively caterpillars during the first week or two of their lives. Their parents may be seed eaters, but they go get caterpillars for the babies because the nutrition is more concentrated. So always tolerate a few caterpillars on your plants and just think baby birds. They're really baby birds. Now, don't worry too much. I mean, you can research varieties on the blueberries, but they're not available enough that you should wait to get a blueberry plant just because you want to get a particular variety. Get what's available if it's a southern high bush in your area. It's going to have good fruit. It's going to produce well. And you can keep your eye out for a variety that you have your heart set on. But especially this year, I expect next year, supplies are going to be limited. And so just don't get too hung up on the particular variety. Now, I had a question emailed in earlier about pruning the blueberries, and unfortunately, we don't have any really big ones, mature ones here to show you a little more of the ins and outs of pruning. But blueberries, again, are going to send up new stems from the ground, from the root crown, and a mature blueberry might have 10 to 12 to 15 stems. So it'll be a pretty good sized bush. Now, each of those is going to be very productive for about maybe a maximum of 4 years, and then it's going to decline. It's going to get old, like some of us, and its productivity will decline. And so you're going to help it rotate through first year, second year, third year, fourth year canes, and then you're going to snip out the older ones in time. This one is probably only maybe these are 2-year-old canes here. So they're still in their prime. But if this was a 4-year-old cane, I would snip it off way down at the base to encourage the plant to send up new ones. And I would want to do a little bit of work when it's young, trying to keep it to have a decent shape. And that means I want to keep the center of it open a little bit. And so when I have crossing branches like I don't know if you can see that one, this one here. It's really on this branch, which should be going this way, but it's crossing back into the inside. And so I would remove it. And that means snipping it right close to the branch that it's on, like that. And you can see already more light and air now can get in here. And light and air is essential to encourage the crown to send up more shoots. I could tip prune it so that, I mean, this one has made a little bit of fruit on this branch, but I don't think it's going to make any on any of these. And it's young, and I want to encourage shape above all. And so I would prune this branch back. You can see where there's some new growth, some branching growth coming out here and even here. And I would snip it back to that branching growth here. And I would tip off all of these side branches so that, and I'm going to tip this one to a bud that's growing this way, not a bud that's growing this way. I want it to grow kind of up toward the light there. So I'm going to snip that one. This one's falling down. I don't know if it's broken. Doesn't appear to be, but I'm going to snip that one back a little sharper because I want it to grow more upright. And so I'm going to snip it back to about here and make it branch out.
Would you prune now or?
You know, for shape on a young plant, yes, I would just go ahead and prune it right now. I'm going to leave the branches that have some fruit on them because I'm greedy and I want to eat the fruit. And this is branched well anyway. You can see all the different branches that all potentially can make flowers next spring to give me lots of fruit here. This one is starting to branch. And I've got a couple of really wimpy ones back here that are really tiny. And I don't think they're ever going to do anything. They've been sort of underneath the others. And I'm just going to take them off because I want to encourage the growth in the branches that are stronger. Now here, that opened up a nice new cane that's coming out right here. So we'll leave that one and let it grow a little bit and then probably tip it off so that it branches in maybe a month or so when it's more out like this. And that way we have a nice little plant that will fill in and we'll take another look at it when it goes dormant in the winter. That's the main time for pruning plants that are already producing shrubs. It'll be about mid-January, about the time that you prune your roses. You'll look at the blueberries and do the same thing you do with the roses. First, you're going to look for anything dead or dying or damaged and get rid of those. Then you're going to look at the overall shape and encourage it to have some symmetry and to open up the inside so that light and air can get in there. And then you're gonna, as the plant gets older, look for older canes that are starting to be less productive and remove those in favor of the new canes that are growing up. And I think the emailed question to us earlier was, well, my plant never really went dormant during the winter. And that's true. Many of these southern high bushes don't go completely dormant so that they lose all their leaves. They may go partly dormant, lose some of the foliage, but they do go quiet. And they're not growing actively and they're not blooming or ripening fruit. And so that's a good time to prune. They're going to bloom on the new spring growth that comes up. So you don't have to worry that you're cutting fruit off if you prune during the dormant season in about January. You probably have till mid-February before they really start to grow again. You don't want to prune them hard probably in the late fall or very early winter. Even though our winters aren't really cold here. They're not cold enough to bother the roots or anything like that. By pruning in December or so, you may encourage new growth to start out at that time. And then we could get an early frost in, say, late December, or a January frost that could damage the new growth. So that's probably a time when you don't want to prune. But later in the winter, you prune, and by the time they start to grow out, chances of frost are gone. By mid-February, our chances of frost are minimal here. And it seems like, I suppose it's global warming, we're having less and less frost, at least from what I've been able to observe. But that's only in the last few years. That could just be cyclical. Yeah, blueberries are easy to grow, maybe just slightly more challenging than the strawberries. You can get taller ones, you can get shorter ones, you can make borders with them. They're really quite attractive plants, especially if you trim them somewhat regularly so that they don't get too leggy and long. If you happen upon one, if you buy a house or something that has some old blueberries in it that are all woody and ugly looking, they get kind of interesting, gnarly and silvery in the bark as they get older. You're going to treat it like it was an old rose. You're going to probably cut it down about halfway, open up the center, and then remove some of the old canes in order to encourage new ones to come up, and then start treating it like you would a newer shrub as it adds new canes, taking out the old ones. And you can revive them. They should live 40, 50 years if they're in a spot that they like. I encourage you all to get some blueberries and go for it. Taylor, do we have blueberry questions? Oh.
Hey there. All right. So
Hi.
you actually did a really great job answering questions as they were coming in, and I really appreciate you going over the pruning. We had some good questions about pruning, but you kind of covered a lot of it. One thing that was brought up a few times was if the plant needs to be replanted after a certain amount of years, does it have like a lifespan? I know you're talking about like new growth coming up and then trimming back the old growth. Is there like a 10-year, 20-year, 5-year kind of lifespan that you have to worry about with blueberries, or even strawberries too, was brought up earlier?
Okay, yeah, that's a real good question. I mentioned with blueberries can live a long time. They're a woody shrub. 40, 50 years is not unheard of. In a container, you will want to at least look at the roots every few years. And that means, doing what I did here, knock it out of the container and see what things look like. I mean, you can see here, this hasn't even filled this pot. It hasn't even gotten to the bottom here. The roots go to about here. Clearly, it doesn't need to be repotted at this point. It can go another season and this be just happy as a clam. If the roots were all kind of matted around the edge of the pot, then I would want to repot it either into a larger pot, or I would want to cut the top back more substantially than usual and remove some of the soil in the root ball so that I can repot it into the same pot with fresh potting soil. Maybe every 3 or 4 years at the most, but that could certainly be done. Strawberries are a little bit different in that the crowns are really only productive for about 3 years, and then they start to lose their vigor. So strawberries you'll want to replant on a fairly regular basis. If you have a bed of strawberries that just sort of becomes a mass, and you're not keeping track of new strawberries taking root, just plan to replace it about every 3 to 4 years. Otherwise, start your runners or divide your crowns so that a given crown doesn't have to produce more than 3 or 4 years. and then they'll keep producing vigorously. Otherwise, they just sort of decline, they give you fewer berries, and you end up with just a kind of big ground cover area without much to eat.
All right. So that was mentioned earlier, and actually I would love your opinion on this kind of stuff because I get this question a lot, but use of coffee grounds when growing blueberries. I know it's a little bit acidic, but people want to use that as like an amendment. What's your opinion on that?
One of my favorite topics.
This comes up in compost.
This comes up a lot.
It does.
Coffee grounds are fine to mix into your soil as just an organic soil amendment. They're not composted, so they are going to draw some nitrogen out of the soil as they decompose. They are not very acidic once you've made coffee with them. Most of the acidity is in the coffee you're drinking, and the grounds themselves are quite neutral once the coffee's been made. So they don't add acidity for the blueberries, for instance. And there is a danger with them. It's not a poisonous danger or anything like that, but a horticultural difficulty. If you put a layer of coffee grounds on top of the soil, it will glom together, dry out, and be impossible to get water through. And the water will just run off the coffee grounds and not go down through them into the root ball. So I absolutely do not recommend coffee grounds as a mulch. They're okay if they're stirred into the soil, or even better if you put them in your compost pile and compost them. But don't just lay them on top of the soil. They'll be a detriment and not a good addition.
Cool. I know we probably have a few more things you want to talk about, and we're kind of running towards the end of our time. But quickly, quickly, do you know if you can actually propagate blueberries by cuttings, or do you know about like getting the root from cuttings?
Yeah, they are propagated from cuttings. You want to use what we call semi-hardwood cuttings. So in other words, you don't take the very sort of flexible new growth and try to root that. The best time to take the cuttings is in the fall, and you want this kind of stiffer wood that's behind the new growth to make your cuttings with. Use some rooting hormone, use a mixture of about half peat moss, half perlite as the rooting mixture. And again, you may need to tent them in some way with some plastic or something to keep the humidity up. In a greenhouse full of blueberry cuttings, they'll have a little misting system that on a timer that comes on about every 5 minutes and gives them a blast of mist to keep them humidified, so they don't have any roots, and so they're unable to take up much water. So you have to add the humidity for the leaves from the outside. So a little dome made of plastic, like a mini greenhouse that you're gonna make, will work. But they probably will not root unless you can keep them humidified like that. They're fairly easy, but not as easy as something that you just put in a glass of water and that roots easily. They're members of the mint family, for instance. So, okay, I'm going to stop berries and I'm going to speak just for a minute or two on bramble berries, which are raspberries and blackberries primarily. The critical thing that one needs to know about these is that they have perennial roots. That is, the roots last a long time, many, many, many years. And they have what are called biennial shoots, most of them. Now, there are exceptions to all of this, and that's why it's a little bit of a complicated topic. But the shoots that come up from the roots are called primicanes, and they grow for a year and they don't make flowers or fruit. And so those are the ones that grow up, and you sort of tie them onto a wire or a fence. And then you wait for the next spring, And while it's sending up some new primocanes, the primocane that came up and that you tied to the fence will become what we call a floricane. And it will send out side branches that make flowers and fruit. And then once that process is finished and you've picked your blackberries or raspberries, that cane will die and you will cut it out. And then by that time, you'll have new primocanes, which will become floricanes for the next year. So that's the basic way that most of the berries grow. And when I say there are exceptions, there are some dwarf varieties, which are very nice to grow in containers, called things like strawberry or raspberry shortcake, blackberry shortcake, which give you fruit on the first year's growth of the canes. And there are other varieties that will do that as well. This is a thornless boysenberry, and it's going to give some fruit from the primocane, but then it will also stick around and become a floricane. So you can see we've got some little flowers here. So the critical thing with the berries is to find a spot that you like that's full sun, be able to give them some support so that you can control their growth. You don't want them to just become a bramble that you can't get into. So putting some posts with some wires or wooden beams that you can tie the canes to helps you control it. And then if they pop shoots up outside the area where you want them, you get right at them and pull them out. And they're easy to yank out when they first grow in the spring. These berries grow best in the climate like they have in Oregon and Washington, between the Cascades and the coast. They're not so good with a super dry summer like we have, unless, again, we irrigate them regularly during the summer. I guess I need to say a word about the wild blackberries that we have here. They were introduced by Luther Burbank in the 1880s. Like many of the things that have taken over in California were an unintended consequence of attempting to bring in a new plant to be of interest and commercial value. You can control those Himalayan blackberries the same way, give them some support, recognize that they have a 2-year cane, get rid of the old canes, control the ones that come up where you don't want them. But if you don't do that, you end up with the kind of brambly thickets that are impenetrable and that we all fought with. So I'm not going to say much more about the bramble berries. There are many, many varieties. They all have their little nuances. They're worth growing, but they do take more work by a large measure to keep under control compared with strawberries and blueberries. So I think enough said.
Very interesting.
I didn't know that. Do we have more questions?
All right. There are a couple more here and there, but we've answered actually a lot of them. And I think a lot of them can be kind of answered throughout the course of this talk. So definitely wanted to let everyone know that this will be up on Tuesday. So if you want to go back, you can scroll and rewind and look at all the stuff. All the information will be here on Tuesday, and all of Dan's stuff and any questions you asked. As well as definitely come into any of the stores with some of your more burning questions and talk to store friendly staff. We're all pretty well versed here, and so we can kind of give our ideas, and everyone has some different kinds of experiences that they go through. So definitely talk to all of us. And then anything that you want to also send an email to Jen. She answered some good questions after the talk. So I think your information's on the website as well, Jen. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, and so just want to bring it back together and let everyone know again that we have some more webinars coming up. We have some on drought tolerance on Wednesday, the 2nd. So at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, definitely come and check out our Waterwise our Water Our World is doing the talk on how to plant drought tolerant gardens, which is very important right now. As well as the next Wednesday after that at 5 p.m. we'll be doing a summer garden spotlight, which is going to be all on cocktails this time. So we have a bartender coming in who's going to be doing information on using the plants that you grow in your garden to produce cocktails and do some fun stuff there. There's also even a discount code for some bidders on our website if you want to kind of make them along with us. So come check out those. And if we have some good support for those, we can continue that process going forward. Again, thank you, Dan, for all your information and all the beautiful plants you kind of showed us and all the tips that we have. So hope to see everyone again and enjoy your Saturday and coming to the stores.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.